XL will be doubling their electric rates. Doubling. So this 18% is going to be nothing.
Yeah, try 100%.
Compared to what other utilities are going to be seeing.
From all angles here, this poor community is really getting crushed by state regulations.
State regulations. The state legislature has done this to Pueblo.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined by my co-host, Amy Cooke. This week, we want to talk about, what piqued our attention was an op-ed that we stumbled across in the Pueblo Chieftain from a former lawmaker, actually the former House Majority Leader, Danae Escar, essentially taking Black Hills Energy to task for their latest rate increase request. That's not exactly the part that caught our attention, though. It was some of the arguments she made and her past position as someone that kind of has something to say about how much utilities are allowed to raise their rates.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. And by the way, Danae Escar was a great lawmaker, represented Pueblo and that area, and she is passionate and loyal to Pueblo. I love Pueblo. Been down there a number of times. Great, great people. But the problem with this op-ed is its disingenuousness. As somebody who watched what the legislature did while she was actually in a position of leadership and while she was in the legislature, she is responsible for the very, the rate increases that the entire state is seeing, not just Pueblo. So let's dive into this real quick. It's Escar, it's in the Pueblo Chieftain, and this is the headline. It's time to take a stand against Black Hills Energy. Real quick history on this. Black Hills is headquartered, I think, out of South Dakota. They have a number of, they run utilities across several states. Mm-hmm. The utility that they own, their Black Hills facilities down in Pueblo, one of their smallest, but it's 105,000 customers roughly. And here's the thing about this. So I want you to keep this in mind as we talk about this. This legislature, the Colorado legislature, along with the governor, and this has really been going on since, let's say, Bill Ritter was elected, has created the atmosphere by which Black Hills must raise its rates. Must. And I say that, must raise its rates. And so Black Hills bought, I think it was Aquila Energy or Electric or whatever. I think it was Aquila, bought it in 2010. And they bought a utility that was, I would say financially, I'm not going to say they weren't bankrupt, but let's just say they were questionable credit ratings. She labels it as, Black Hills says they bought a lemon. The problem is they had to replace 400 megawatts of power immediately. They had to. XL refused to sell to them, and there was an entire story done by the Washington Post. I think we've probably talked about it on the show. I know I've talked about it in certainly when I've been giving speeches and things, how not to shut down a coal-fired power plant. Well, they had to replace 400 megawatts of power right away. They couldn't build a coal-fired power plant, so they built a natural gas-fired power plant. And so they had to recoup that cost. Well, they were only able to own half of that. And then the other half was an independent power producer who, by the way, they have to be made whole. So Black Hills, yes, their rates were high. They were higher than the rest of the state. But here's the point. Black Hills is the model utility for the state legislature. If you were to look at the state legislature, how they want a utility to look, they want it to look like Black Hills. There is no coal, zero coal, None, nada. They use natural gas and they have a lot of renewables. Yep. That's what the state legislature and the governor want. And Danae Esgar was part of the state legislature that helped define that. So when I see this in writing, she says it's unconscionable for Black Hills to impose further increases on a community that struggles to make ends meet. You said it, we were talking about it earlier. It's a little bit of crocodile tears. This, she created it. She helped to create it. And I will throw this out there too. They haven't had a rate increase in Black Hills in 7 years. Yeah, I think those of us who are Xcel Energy ratepayers, we'd love to go 7 years without a rate increase. And they're having to come back and ask for a rate increase. What did they say, 18%?
Yep.
I think it's 18%. I'm going, they haven't had a rate increase in 7 years. They're coming back and asking for an 18% rate increase to comply with regulations that Danae Esgar helped usher in.
Yeah, no, the crocodile tears point is great. I don't doubt former Senator Esgar's or former Representative Esgar's sincerity that she feels bad for the people of Pueblo. It's obviously a very working class community, has a higher poverty rate than many other metropolitan areas in the state. Get it? But throughout this story, as you kind of laid out, there's a legislative action that sort of follows every single bit of this this tale here with Black Hills. You mentioned they haven't had a rate increase since 2016. That's because prior to 2016, they were jacking up rates like crazy because of the Washington Post story that you were talking about. They were forced to shut down coal because the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act.
Clean Air, Clean Jobs, House Bill 1365,
so
the bane of our existence.
Couldn't have coal plants, so they had to shut those down and build new natural gas, which, capital expenditures for a monopoly utility means you have to raise rates, you have to recoup those costs and make a profit. So they stopped, they took a lot of heat for that. Obviously, they had really, really high rates. So they said, okay, we'll hold off for 7 or 8 years and not ask for another rate increase. And now they're back asking for a rate increase. And one of the reasons that they need to raise rates so much, 18% in this case, is a policy that, once again, the legislature adopted, net metering. Maybe we'll do a show later where we get into the weedy details of what net metering is. But essentially, it's if you have rooftop solar, you get to pay less on your power bills because you're, in theory, supplying power to the grid. Well, the thing is, the grid still has fixed costs that don't care whether or not you have rooftop solar. So folks, typically high-income folks, studies always show that higher income folks tend to be the ones with rooftop solar, are paying less to maintain a grid that the vast majority of the customers of Black Hills are paying more for to use the same amount of power. And so they have to recoup that lost 8 years of lost revenue from that program that, once again, started from the legislature. And then finally, she complains, she mentions, in addition to this rate increase that she's railing against, she says, and if that wasn't enough, Black Hills has also filed an electric resource plan, which could further escalate rates in the near future. Well, you don't say. Where did they get the idea to file an electric resource plan? Oh yeah, Senate Bill 19236, which mandated that Colorado's utilities periodically file electric resource plans and clean energy plans to meet the state's carbon goals. And they're also in the midst of doing that at the PUC. So all of these things have a legislative component that have allowed a monopoly utility to do what monopoly utilities do, which is invest capital, build power, recoup those costs, and raise rates to do so. I don't doubt her sincerity, but I have to wonder why she's not connecting the dots here.
And I also feel really bad for the ratepayers of Pueblo.
Yeah, absolutely.
I get it. I listen, you aren't alone. This is happening in utilities all across Colorado. Yep. You are not by yourself in this. But for them to for a former legislator to not recognize her own role in it, and this is what we've been talking about so much, is the role that the legislature has played in creating this. Essentially, what they said is, we want to decarbonize, and we want to decarbonize by 2040, meaning they want wind, solar, and batteries or hydrogen or whatever else they're going, because we know they're not using nuclear. They want to decarbonize by 2040, and they're telling the utilities to do it. And that what they're directing is they're telling the PUC the utilities must do it. and because of the way we're set up, they tell essentially what they're saying is utilities go forth and build,
right,
so that we can comply and comply with our decarbonization, and you are going to be rewarded. The precedent was set in the very bill, House Bill 1365, Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act, where they could close down perfectly good, useful assets like a coal-fired power plant and replace them with natural gas and get full cost recovery, as well as accelerated depreciation, early retirement.
right.
So she was part of a body that is responsible for the very thing that she's complaining about with Pueblo. I'm glad she is. What I'd like her to do is to actually own it, and all the other legislators who have been a part of this and who are complaining about rates to own their own part in this, which is the major part of it. So I want to share with you something on this, Jake. It says, what is the cause of these increases? It's a question that is in testimony that you'll find if you go to the PUC. Listen, we have it, so you don't have to go find it. It's the supplemental direct testimony and attachments of Daniel Ahern's on behalf of Black Hills, Colorado. And he's a consultant who provided testimony about these rate increases. And the question is, what causes these rate increases? And this is how he answers it. Colorado Springs Utility will more than double its electric generation capacity in the next 5 years. Part of the agency's efforts to meet state regulations for clean energy. So in other words, they're having to double their generation in order to meet the state's energy requirements. That's what he's answering as what causes these increases. And then there was another question on this. Are there other Colorado utilities that you're aware of that will likely see rate increases between now and 2040? And who does he cite? Xcel Energy, Public Service Company of Colorado. And they say, according to his testimony, average rates that indicate roughly doubling from 2025 to 2040.
Wow. Doubling.
Xcel will be doubling their electric rate. Doubling. So this 18% is going to be nothing.
Yeah, try 100%.
Compared to what other utilities are going to be seeing. Why? Because Black Hills already is the model utility.
Right.
They already have natural gas and wind and solar.
And this is where Pueblo really gets hit with a twofer, right? Because not only are they subject to Black Hills high rates because they're complying with all these state mandates, but outside of the Black Hills region, obviously the Comanche 3 coal plant is there in Pueblo. That's an Xcel plant. That's not Black Hills, but that's still being forced to close, again, to comply with state mandates. And that's a huge source of employment for the city, a huge source of property tax revenue for the community in Pueblo. And so from all angles here, this poor community is really getting crushed by state regulations.
State regulations. The state legislature has done this to Pueblo.
Yeah.
And so the shutting down of Comanche, the Comanche coal-fired power plants, which, by the way, Xcel ratepayers had invested significant amount of money to bring those up to environmental standards. It was some of the cleanest. It was some of the cleanest burning coal-fired power plants, and of course, we're shutting them all down prematurely, and then Pueblo doesn't get to benefit from the property taxes and just the economic ripple effect of high-paying jobs at those Comanche the Comanche power plants. And further, to add insult to injury, the suggestion from some in Pueblo, there was a commission in Pueblo, was let's see about doing a coal to nuclear transition down at Comanche. And the legislature, which wants to decarbonize, refuses to allow nuclear. They're openly hostile to nuclear. So Pueblo, I mean, this is, for Pueblo, this is, the economic impact is going to be significant.
Yeah. No, there's no question about that. There's one thing that you mentioned before we started recording I want to give you a chance to touch on. Kind of goes back to Black Hills and the fact that they are, a coal-free, high renewable penetration utility. And you've mentioned Black Hills operates in other states, and some of the things they operate in other states, they have data centers within their territories. But do they in Colorado?
No, they
Yeah.
don't have any data centers in Colorado. And there's a reason for that, because the rates are so much higher.
Yep.
And it isn't just Black Hills rates, it's rates all over the state. Where they do have data centers and they operate 2 data centers is in Wyoming.
Right.
They operate 2 data centers, or I shouldn't say that. They power 2 data centers in Wyoming where they have coal-fired power, and their power is much cheaper, and it's probably more reliable. I mean, we've done shows on reliability, but they get reliable, affordable power in Wyoming. So there are 2 data centers that Black Hills powers in Wyoming. Zero in Colorado. But this isn't, and we're talking about Black Hills, but remember, this is not just Black Hills.
Right.
I think about this. Danae Escar, who is now a county commissioner down in Pueblo, says that she was talking about the capital investment. Black Hills has invested nearly $371 million in capital projects and plans to invest another $98 million this year. And those investments guarantee a rate of return of 10.5%, funded by ratepayers. Well, okay, again, they're building that because the legislature is requiring it. The rate of return is also, that was part of, House Bill 1365 allowed them to get, almost extraordinary recovery on building some of these assets. They set it up this way. But I also look at, we talked about United Power. We've talked about United Power on another show. They're paying $700 million just to get away from Tri-State.
Right.
Xcel said that it can't meet the requirements of its carbon requirements. And what was the projection on that? 12 billion or something?
12 or 15 billion. 15. And they said they need to raise it even more.
Yeah, they can't do it. They can't meet the requirements of that. This is happening all over the state. And so Pueblo, I'm sorry, I know this is hard. I think 18%, though, we're going to look back on 18% and go, oh man, that's great. Xcel is looking to double it. And I think you'll see double. We've talked about it before, triple. I think you can see 4-figure monthly electric bills in the state of Colorado by 2040.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. It's a scary thought. One thing before we wrap up here, I want to touch on a little bit of the political fallout that seems to be developing. As of recording this, the rate increase hasn't been approved yet. It's still, these rate cases tend to take a very long time at the PUC because there's all these interveners and testimony and all that. But in the meantime, instead of, training their ire at the Colorado legislature, it seems that many in Pueblo are considering turning into a municipal utility, sort of like Colorado Springs. And, that's certainly an option. I just would caution listeners and anyone else, weighing this to consider that is not a cheap proposition. If the idea of these rate increases are so financially anxiety-inducing, wait till you see what it costs to cut your franchise with your investor utility and start up your own municipal utility and make up the difference. So I just want to put that out there. That's obviously something that's probably going to be a live proposition as people are justifiably freaking out over rate increases. May or may not be the best way for folks to go. But.
You know what the best way to go? Get the legislature to change the law. I mean, that would be way cheaper. Get the legislature to change the law. Tell the legislature to prioritize reliability and affordability before carbon emissions. You can include carbon emissions in there, but tell them that reliability and affordability must be maintained.
Yep. And we've seen state legislatures do this, right? We covered Utah several episodes back where they did an order of operations. They included cleanliness and sustainability in their priorities, but they made sure that reliability and affordability were paramount. So it's certainly not outside the realm of possibility. But as we're coming up on time here, Amy, do you have any takeaways for our listeners?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is that remember, Black Hills, when you look at their generation portfolios, is the model utility for Colorado. That's what they envisioned when clean air, clean jobs, and all the subsequent legislation since then has been to get utilities away from coal to natural gas, and then ultimately to wind, solar, and batteries. And that's the direction Black Hills is going. So this is the model that they want. So remember that when everybody in Pueblo, the people to look at are at the legislature, because you're getting exactly what the legislature wanted out of a utility. I actually think it's going to get more expensive. I think, I love the idea that it's only 18%. And I know that sounds like a lot, and you're absolutely right. But if you want to look at inflation is in the energy sector. It's into absolutely everything, because we continue to shut down baseload power and we replace it. They have to pay for the replacement, but we're replacing it. You have to build out more. You have to overbuild essentially in Colorado to get any semblance of reliability. So it's going to get more expensive, and I'm sorry to say that. And then Pueblo residents, get yourself a generator.
Yep, you're going to need it if this keeps going down the road. But that does it for us. If you like what you saw here on this episode, feel free to head over to iitv.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you get audio podcasts, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And we also are available if you want to reach out and suggest future show topics or guest suggestions. We love to hear from our listeners. You can send those over at info@powergab.org. And until next week, we'll see you.